All right, there we go. All right. Now, lender contribution. Bob was asking about what about the lender contribution? What's the best way to do that? So that's kind of the same process, Bob. You can do it as negative points here if you want, and that will certainly work. The points field though is an APR field. So what's going to happen is if your contribution exceeds your APR costs here, you're going to end up with negative APR costs for a total. So when you're doing contributions, I wouldn't necessarily use the points field. I would actually go into the detail here and add a new line item. And we actually have one in here called contribution. And this one has logic built into it. So when you select contribution, it knows that the contribution can't be borrower paid. It's got to be lender, seller, or broker paid. And then whatever number you put in here, let's say it's a $1,500 contribution, that's going to reduce the cash to close by this amount. Now, it decides where to apply the contribution based on whether you check the APR box or the prepaid escrow box if the contribution is indeed towards the reserves. Now, if you've got, and some banks are real sticklers about where the contribution is supposed to apply to. Should it apply to the APR costs? Should it apply to the non-APR costs? Should it be a cascade effect where it first pays off APR, then non-APR? If that's the oh, and Josh, thank you for the correction. No lender calls it contribution. Can we rename it lender credit? So you can actually build your own called lender credit. I'll show you how to do that in just a moment. But in this case, the contribution one here, this could be a contribution from the seller as well. So that's why we have it kind of a global term. But I'll show you the customized one in just a moment. Now, if you need to apply a contribution or a credit to partially to the APR and partially to non-APR costs, you would probably need to put in two of them. So let's say this $1,500, only 1,000 of it is going into paying down the APR costs. I would need to add another one and account for the extra 500 and leave that non-APR so that it's going to knock down the appropriate costs and my APR is going to be constant. It's going to remain what I'm expecting to see in there. Now, what Josh was asking about, there is a way to do this a second way. So short of using that contribution field, which already has logic built into it, you can add a custom fee. So if you hit add custom fee and call this one lender credit and then hit OK, that fee will now be in your drop down from there on out. So it's sorted in alphabetical order, but when you first add a custom fee, it's going to be at the very bottom of the list. But the next time you go into this fee drop down, you'll see lender credit will be near the L's. But when you do this and you use a custom fee, this is not going to have the logic in it that knows it's supposed to knock down to the cash to close. This is Edge thinks it's a fee, not necessarily a credit. So in order to make this a credit, you would put in a negative amount and then leave that borrower paid, and it'll knock down the borrower paid fees by the amount you put in here. Now, if you need to separate that where it's some of it's APR, some of it's non-APR, same concept, just add an additional fee, go to your L's or just go to the one you just created. Oops, gotta make that negative. And I could separate these out so that one of them is paying APR fees and one of them is paying non-APR fees. Now, when you're done with that, simply apply to loan, and then you've got all your fees done here. Monthly costs are already here. So what I was saying earlier is in order to have a valid presentation, you're going to need at least two products on here. Now, if we had the information from our current mortgage, we'd be showing that one as one of the products, and we'd only need one refinance option available. But in this case, remember, we pulled this off a lead sheet. We don't have the information about their current mortgage. So what we're going to do instead is when we get to the end, we're not going to show the current mortgage. So we need to add a second product here so we have a valid comparison. So I'll hit add another product, and I'll just show them a 15-year note. And what I'm going to do is I'll use that copy button, and I'm going to copy that 30 fix that I already did. And you can see it's going to populate everything for me. I'd need to make changes to things like the term. This is now going to become a 180. And then interest rate, if it was different on the 15-year versus the 30-year, make your update there. If any closing costs were different, you'd certainly want to change the individual line items. Say maybe a specific fee is no longer necessary when you're in a 15 versus a 30. You could certainly change those by going back into the detail, edit or remove any fees that you need. And then the copy also took care of my monthly costs, so I don't need to do anything about that. And now I have a valid comparison. I have two products against each other. So as I'm going through here, you can see it automatically tries to default to the current mortgage being the benchmark, but we don't have a current mortgage on this one. So what we're going to do is when we get to the end of the presentation here, we're going to uncheck the box for the current mortgage. And then, of course, alter your payment notes. And I'd probably put the word estimated here. And now you can see we've got two products, no current mortgage, because we don't know what that current mortgage really looks like. So when we get to the end result, you can see we've got two new refi products, and the critical part to this is the cash to close. The cash to close here is basically we're doing a rate and term refinance against their current loan amount for $190. Then we've also got our fees, which I didn't finance these into the loan, so they're being called for at close. Now, if you do want to finance these into the loan, say for instance, you're like on this presentation, you're at a 76% loan to value, you can get it all the way up to 80 before you have to charge MI. So technically, I could probably finance these costs in and still not have to get MI for my borrower. If you wanted to do that, simply go back into the products, go to your closing cost detail, and check the box to add all fees to the loan amount. Then hit apply to loan. And I'm going to do that for the other product as well. And now let's check out what our output presentation looks like. So what this is here, there's one thing I didn't finance into the loan, and that's the prepaid interest. So if I go back into Edge here and check the box, and let's go into the 30 and do the same thing. Now, when this refreshes, we should see zeros. There we go. So zero cash out, zero cash due. That's because everything is now financed into the loan. So this is a perfect rate and term refi with no cash due at close. Now, if you want to check your LTV levels, you can just go back into Edge and take a look right here. With the fees financed in, we're still at 77.53, so we're still okay on that one. We're not going to need mortgage insurance, and we're solid. Now, the other way you could do this, if you don't want to finance the fees in, if you simply want to increase the loan amount and have the loan take care of the fees. So I'm going to uncheck all these boxes here. And instead, what I'll do is I'll just set my equity percentage. So let's say I want this to be a 20% equity percentage. Now it has increased my loan amount to $200,000. It's got a payoff of $190, so I have $10,000 to play with for my cash to close. So that $10,000, part of it is going to be used to cover the closing costs that were not financed into the loan. And we'll see that there's actually a cash out now. So that's the difference. Because we took $200,000 for the loan amount, we stayed at the 80% mark. We're going to show a cash out of $6,000 after those closing costs are already paid. We can certainly do that on both of these if we wanted to make it a cash out. But again, check the rates. Once you get into a cash out, you might have a rate hit for that. All right, so let me put this back to where it was. And if you want an easy way to get back to the rate and term payoff here, just simply flip the refi switch and it'll bring back in that amount that was over in the assumptions area. Oops, I got him an extra 10 grand out. Now, anyway, let's continue on. There is another way you can do this as well. So this is the one where you're preparing a refinance proposal, but you don't have all the information. You're simply showing a couple of new refi options. Now, the other way you can do this is if you do have all the data present. In the assumptions area, if you complete this area, you can actually show the current mortgage. So let's say they took out this loan a few years ago at a 5% interest rate, oops, and a 360 term. And let's say their original note was 200. Now this remaining balance here, if you have a payoff if you have a dollar amount in this payoff field, it's going to use this for the cash to close. So it won't actually use your current balance as the payoff amount. If you do want to use your current balance as the payoff amount, which is perfectly fine, simply remove the current total payoff. And now this figure will be used for your payoff. Now, if you've got all this information, and certainly want to put this in there, now you have not only the two new refi products, but you have a valid current mortgage. So we can now look at the current checkbox here. And now when we get to our presentation, we're going to see this update so that it's no longer showing just the two refi products. We're actually going to see a current mortgage fall into line. There it goes. And you can see in this case, the 30-year note is saving them $165 a month. The 15-year note is going to cost them $331 more a month. But in either case, their payoff is going to be, if the 30-year note, they still got a new amortization now, so it's a 30-year payoff. But I would probably want to reapply this monthly savings either into their savings account so I can show them how much they're gaining on this, or straight back into the principal of the loan. Now for the 15-year note, they are paying a little bit more, but they're going to pay off the note a lot faster. So let's take a look at the reinvestment strategy for this 30-year. If we're saving them $165, let's show them what they can do with that money. And in order to alter this, you're going to go into your analysis screen and choose Adjust Reinvestment Strategy. Now, you can see here in green, that's showing us our savings on this product. If I just want to put this straight back into the mortgage every month, I can put it right here. And when I do that, you can see my freedom point is now dropped down to 22.5 years. So the story here for my client is I'm going to show you a way to refinance your mortgage for zero cash out or zero cash due, make the same payment that you're making right now, and shave 5 years off of your freedom point. So pretty important story to tell there. Obviously, this is a recommendation. This is not a requirement for them to make that principal reduction payment. So this freedom point could be longer if they choose not to make this extra payment, every couple of months, depending on what their finances look like. Obviously, the 15-year is kind of rigid. They do have to make this higher payment, this 331 more, but they will net a 15-year payoff point out of that. So this one gives them a little bit more option in terms of what they want to do with their mortgage and how long they want to be in it, how much they can actually afford to pay on a monthly level. Whereas the 15 would be pretty static. It's kind of set in stone. You got to make that payment, but you will end up with a 15-year payoff. All right, so hopefully that was helpful on the refinance area. And if you have, let's go into the reinvestment grid again. I want to show you something else. You may not be aware of this, but all of these reinvestments that are outlined in blue, they're customizable. So for instance, in this case, my refi 30, I'm saving 164 a month. This is going from a fixed loan to a fixed loan. So that really isn't going to change. But what if there was MI involved? What if there was other factors that are going to change the payment over time, like adjustable rate mortgages? You can actually customize your payments. So instead of doing just a constant 164, maybe for the first year, I want them to pay this and then pay a little bit more the next year. So in that case, at month one, it's going to start at 164. I can add another line item and say, well, after the first year, let's bring this up to 200. And let's just continue it forward from there. Now, what that does is you can see it customizes your principal reduction area, and it shows even a shorter freedom point. And that's just from making just a slightly higher payment starting the second year. So it's up to you in terms of where you want to make changes to this. Oftentimes I see people using this for doing lump sum payments. Say for instance, every year when they get their tax return, we want to recommend they put a certain amount of money straight back into their mortgage. You can certainly do that. And if you're going to do lump sums, what I would do is at month 13, this would be my lump sum area. And let's say it's $5,000. And then I'll add another line item for month 14 to bring it back to the previous payment. So what this is telling me is that at month one, I'm going to start making this $164 extra payment. For the first 12 months, I'm going to make that payment every month. At month 13, I'm doing a lump sum $5,000 payment. Then back to in 14, I'm back to the original I'm back to the original payment scheme I was before, and that'll continue on unless I stop it. Now, the way to stop one of these is to add a line item with whatever month you want to stop it at, let's say at the 10-year point, and then leave it zero. So now after that point, there's no further principal reduction going in there. And Bob's question, he says, I missed the pre-edge days when you could show a break-even point in months. Bob, you couldn't actually show that in Analyze, but you can show it here in the short-term area. So if I wanted to show a break-even point on these two mortgages, I need to isolate where the savings shift happens here. So if I change my short-term months, let's look at 12 months. At 12 months, the new products still haven't overcome the closing costs. Basically, they haven't saved enough interest in MI to overcome the closing costs that they had to pay. If we want to find out where they break even on this, all we have to do is keep adjusting this figure until we start seeing a savings here. So let's look at month 15. And you can see the 15-year note, actually, by month 15, it starts making savings. They've broken even on their closing costs. The 30-year note, not quite yet. Let's take it out to 20 months. At 20 months, we've broken even with both of them. We can actually isolate this down a little bit more. There we go. So month 18 is when both of them would have broken even on the closing cost. The 15-year would break a little bit earlier, 14th or 15th month, but by month 18, both of these have actually broken even. So hopefully that helps, Bob. All right, so let's take a look at a couple of other strategies. Now we've covered some refinance presentation today. We showed you a couple of different ways to do it depending on how much information you have. Now let's take a look at a couple of just purchase strategies. Now hopefully you have all seen the cost of waiting, so I'm not going to cover that one. If you do want to see it, let me know in the chat, and we can certainly do that. But one of the ones that we're seeing is having a lot of use lately is the move up buyer presentation. And it's a little bit complex when you first take a look at it, but when you get the hang of it, it can be a really powerful presentation for somebody who already owns a home and wants to use the proceeds from the sale of their current home to help with a down payment on a new property. So let's take a look at that. I'm going to start a brand new client. And for this one, it's not for a specific borrower. So I'm actually going to make this a marketing presentation, and that removes specific borrower information and property information off this presentation. So anytime you're going to post one of these to social media or on a website or something like that, make it a marketing presentation so you don't have NPI showing up where it shouldn't be. All right, so we'll call this one move up. And let's see, move up to a bigger house. And then when we do a move up buyer presentation, we're going to leave it at own because they do own a property. Partner email, if you're including a realtor partner on this where you're basically allowing them to share this link as well, and you want them to be notified when this presentation is viewed, just like you get notifications. If you put your partner's email in here, there's going to be a checkbox when you get to the very end of the presentation that allows you to have them get the alerts too. So I'll put that one in there. Partner at partner.com. And then friendly name, remember what this is. This is not a nickname for your borrower. This is kind of a nickname for your presentation. It's also a great place to indicate where you've put this. So if you have posted this to Facebook, for instance, I would put that in there. And I might even indicate realtor's page because I posted it on their page, something like that. Now, the important part about this is when you do start getting the alerts, if you have a bunch of move up buyer presentations that you've created for different realtor partners, different avenues, different media, the best way to figure out where those alerts are coming from, because they're all going to look identical when you get the alerts, is the friendly name. Because when you get the alert, you can look at it and it'll say, oh, okay, I got X amount of alerts from this one I posted to this realtor's page versus X amount of alerts from another presentation I called the same thing that I posted elsewhere. Now the goals, while the goal is to purchase a new home, we actually don't want to check that on this because we want to be able to enter their current mortgage information. So I'm actually just going to leave these blank or even just check other. Now we still get questions about the current mortgage, and we do need to have this information available. So most important one is going to be the property value. What's it valued at right now? If you do have all the information, great, enter it in, but this is really the most critical one. So let's say their property value currently is at 300. And usually in a move-up buyer type of situation, your borrower has been in the house for a few years and they've accrued some equity, whether that's through paying down the mortgage faster or whether it's from just appreciation on their property because the area just appreciated rapidly, and now with a new appraisal, they've got a lot more equity than they would have had before. So I'm going to put in, let's say they've had this loan for a few years now. Their original loan amount, let's say, was 150, and let's say they had a 5% interest rate. Now, when you put in those factors, it's automatically going to try and calculate the remaining balance for you just based on the amortization schedule. Now, you can overwrite this. So if they've paid the mortgage down with extra principal payments, you could certainly, let's say it was 135. We can enter that, and it's actually going to reduce the freedom point accordingly, knowing that they've paid extra principal on this. Now, the other thing to keep in mind here is if we have a remaining balance of 135, we want to make a mental note of what our proceeds are going to be. If we have 300,000 as our property value here, minus the 135, we have 165 minus, and you want to factor in the realtor cost for selling the property. So let's say we have about 155 available. And I like to put it here in the yellow sticky pad because that one is going to carry through your entire presentation, so you'll be able to see it when you're generating your new products. Now enter their hazard and taxes, and usually you're going to know the dollar amounts on these guys. So let's say it's 85 and about 170. Oops. They wouldn't have mortgage insurance on this because they've got a ton of equity, so they've definitely dropped below that 78% mark. Now the affordability, because we're doing a marketing presentation, we really don't need any of this, but if you do want to show tax benefit on your finalized presentation, you can enter a tax bracket here. And for a tax bracket, since you don't have a specific client in mind, you kind of just want to choose one that's in the average, I guess if you took a look at the average property prices in the area that you're targeting, you can kind of infer what average income range you're looking at. Now, I would tell you probably the 25% range is the biggest tax bracket range that's in there, and it's probably applicable to a majority of the cases you're going to work with, unless you're working on $1 million homes, and you're going to go up to the 28% bracket. But if you do want to check on the tax bracket and just kind of see what those values relate to, hit Find Tax Bracket. And you can see for single in 2015 filing year, the 25% mark is pretty wide range, 37 to 90,000. The 28% mark is 90,000 to 190. So you can pick and choose as to which one you think is probably more applicable to your borrowers. For me, I'm looking at probably the 25% as being a pretty good indicator for the property price I'm looking at, that 300,000 purchase price. Now, if you don't enter a tax bracket here, it won't show the tax benefit on your finalized presentation. So keep that in mind. If you're not comfortable talking about tax benefit, that's okay. Nobody's expecting you to be a tax expert. Some people are more comfortable than others when they're talking about it. I will tell you that anytime you are going to show tax benefit, make sure to disclaim yourself. Put it in the payment note. Say something like the tax benefit is an estimate only. Consult your CPA or financial planner for further details, whatever the case may be. But put some verbiage in there so that you can disclaim yourself against these numbers being slightly off because you don't know their specific credit situation or their specific tax filing situation. Now, we don't need anything for the minimums and maximums here. And now when we get into our new products, these are not going to be refis. These are going to be purchase products. So we're going to be comparing the current mortgage versus new purchase products where we're using this 155 proceeds for our down payment. So right now they're in a $300,000 house. What if we want to move them up to a 325? Now we know they've got that 155 available. We can actually put that in the down payment field if we want. I'd probably pad it for closing costs a little bit. So maybe for the down payment, put in 140, something like that. And you can see our new base loan amount, 185. Now we'll put in the interest rate that we can get them on this property, and then our term. And we'll call this move up to 325K. Now we'll apply our closing cost template. Let's use that one. But the difference is when you're doing a move-up buyer presentation is we want to account for that money that they're getting from the proceeds. So how do we do it? We add a custom fee, call it proceeds from sale. And I default this one as a prepaid escrow because, and I'll explain this to you a little bit more once we get to the end of the presentation. The reason I choose this one is the prepaid escrows, the reserves, are not factored into the short-term savings. If I made this proceeds from sale an APR proceed or a non-APR proceed, we're going to see that short-term savings area be totally whacked out. So I'm going to leave this at default prepaid so it does not affect my short-term savings area. Now, again, this is a custom fee, or it's a custom fee in terms of what Edge thinks. So we need to make it a negative amount for the proceeds. And then we hit apply to loan. Now you can see in our prepaid escrows line, we're getting that negative 155. That is the proceeds from the sale. Then we can enter our new taxes and insurance here. And we're still really low LTV on this one. Obviously, this is an ideal case when we're doing a move-up presentation. They've got such a low LTV here that we got plenty of equity to work with. Sometimes you're going to butt up against that 80% mark and you'll be pretty close to it. So you may have less available from the proceeds. But you can see we're actually we're moving them up into a new property. It is going to cost them $256 more to move up. And in the 60-month period of time, this is going to cost them a little bit more. And naturally, the reason behind this is if they've taken a new loan out on a new amortization, and they've gone to a higher property. Now let's take a look at the finalized product. So taxes are included in the payment. And then a little verbiage about the tax bracket. There we go. And then when we get to the very end here, oops, sorry, the first screen there, we've got a current mortgage and we've got our move up. So when we get to the very end of the presentation, let's take a look at what we're seeing here. Now, by default, the current mortgage is going to save them money. They're moving up from a loan amount of 135 to 185, so that's a pretty significant jump. But the equity that they're getting out of this, and probably the biggest story on the move up buyer, is when we change this long term, instead of being interest and MI paid to net worth, that's really going to be the selling point. So if we go back into our analysis screen, change this to net worth, and let's take it out at the 30-year point. So you can see the difference here, net worth over the long term for this home. They've actually increased $60,000 in net worth if they were to keep both loans to full term. Now that's without any appreciation. So if we factored in appreciation, and just trigger a save there, you can see where this goes. I mean, it's the same difference here, but obviously much bigger values over time. Now we can certainly eyeball the short term and just kind of see where we're at in the shorter areas, it's not costing them a heck of a lot more in interest in MI over time. We can even look at the 10-year point. It's really pretty negligible in terms of what it's costing them to gain this extra equity in the long term. But they're in a bigger property. We've refinanced, or we haven't refinanced their current mortgage. We've actually sold their current property, used the proceeds for a new property that's much bigger. Now, we've also increased their loan amount pretty significantly, so certainly a talking point that you'd want to have with your borrowers. But it's a good way to at least start the conversation of, look at what you're at right now. We can do a refi on your current property. You can stay there and I can save you money. Or let's talk about what it would take to get you into a new property. Let's use some proceeds from a sale of your home for a down payment. Now, you could even go a little bit farther into this. I like to kind of nerd out on the reinvestment grid here. We've got to make an assumption in terms of what they're going to be doing with the money. What money do they have available? In this case, they've got $11,000 left after they do this move up and after paying closing costs. So I want to apply this directly to a new investment account. And you can see that it takes that $11,000 that's left from the proceeds, puts it down into my investment. Let's say I'm working with a financial planner and he says he can give me a 2% rate of return on that portfolio. At the 30-year period of time, just that money growing on its own without any additional reinvestment, we're looking at an extra 20 grand there. So there's certainly different ways you can position this presentation to show what the effects are on net worth growth. You can see it's significantly higher now by that 20 grand extra. You can even earmark additional payments going into that investment account to help kind of round out that financial plan. All right, so hopefully that was helpful. I know there's a lot there. If you have any questions on what we just covered, or some of it's kind of hazy to you, certainly let me know and I can go over whatever you need there. All right, so with that said, I guess we have 10 minutes left. I don't see any new questions in the box, so let's go over some basics on templates, because templates will save you a bundle of time. And if you don't have them already, it's very important that you develop some templates. Now, there are two types of templates you can use. There are product templates, which they cover the entire product. So in this case, if I wanted to just, and let's move into a new client because I don't want this to be too confusing there. And we'll just call this one John Purchase. When I get over to my products area, I can certainly enter all these details by hand. I can apply the closing costs by hand. But if you have product templates that you've built, they're available in this product dropdown here. So let's say I'm doing a very simple presentation. I'm just doing FHA versus conventional. All I'm going to do is pop in my purchase price. Then I can apply a product template. So I'll apply my FHA template. It automatically fills in all the details that I have available in the template. I can pop in my rate. And my product template already had closing costs built into it. It already had my upfront MIP built into it. It has my monthly costs, even my MI factors. It knows it's supposed to run the MI for the life of the loan. It's got my reserves in there. So from one template, I only had to edit two fields to make this a valid loan product. The one field I had to edit was the purchase price. The other one was the interest rate. Everything else fell into line for me because that's in my templates. Now, if you don't have product templates yet, the easy way to create them is once you create a product in Edge, and let's say you've done this from scratch and you've entered all these figures, you went to the closing costs, you applied a closing cost template, or even you ballparked your fees, that's fine too. Then you put in your monthly costs, you made sure to address your MI factors here. When you're done with that product, you can save it as a template. And you can see here, it just allows you to name it. Once you do that, it's available from then on out on any new product that you open up in Edge. Now, the ones I would recommend you have, an FHA, I like to put conventional in there, a VA, a USDA. You can see I've got a single premium, 5% down conventional, 5-1 arm with a best case scenario, 7-1 arm with caps in there. The arms specifically, those ones will kind of give you hell because unless you know all the caps and adjustments straight off the top of your head, it's a lot of data entry. I'll show you what that looks like. Now, because I used this 7-1 ARM template, it's already selected ARM for me. It knows that it's got a 10-year IO period, so it's got that in there as well. But this is the part that is key that it filled out for me. So I don't have to go back and try and figure out what the first adjustment caps are, how often that 6-month LIBOR is supposed to adjust. I don't have to put that in there. It's already there. What my max rate is going to be, my margin, my index. I've even got a custom scenario running that's attached to this one. So you can see where I'm at. I'm just predicting a 2% adjustment at that first adjustment month and then no further adjustments afterwards. That's fairly realistic. Obviously, nobody knows what the index values are going to do over time. I can tell you though, since about 2009, index values really haven't changed a whole lot. And I'll show you what I mean. Got a cool little place I like to go called mortgagex.com. Hopefully some of you have been here before. But if I wanted to take a look at the traditional rates for the LIBOR, for instance, we can see as a graphic representation here, 2009, it just dropped off and it's been staying pretty flatline since then. We haven't had a whole lot of index movement. And I wouldn't expect to see a whole lot of index movement unless we had something like this up here. That was the crash. That was the meltdown. So we rose up to the meltdown and then hit it and came right back down on the index values. So this is going since 1990. We're seeing this pattern. But since 2009, we've stayed pretty flatline. So I'm pretty comfortable in saying that for the next 7 years or so, I would expect it to continue this trend. Now, you can certainly set this for a worst case scenario, which is going to assume that at your first adjustment point, it's going to adjust up by the first adjustment cap. Then each subsequent period, 6 months, each 6 months, it's going to continue adjusting up at the periodic cap. So an extra two every 6 months until it hits your max rate. Then it's going to stay at the max rate for the rest of the loan. Now, that's pretty unrealistic. I don't see that happening with any index values. However, I will tell you that for compliance purposes, it's great to be able to show this. So if I was going to show a 7-1 worst, I'm going to have a super high APR on this because my payments, a majority of them are going to be at the life cap. But if I'm going to do that, I'm also going to show another scenario with a more realistic prediction on what I think is going to happen. So I would add another product, and let's just call this 7-1 best case. I'll copy that first one I made. And then all I have to do is come in and, oops. Oh, that didn't copy the right one. Oh, there we go. Okay. So let's call this one 7-1 worst. And then we'll go to our 7-1 best. We will copy from the worst case. There we go. That's what we should have seen. And then all I'm going to do is change the scenario from worst to best. Now, best case is also unrealistic. Best case assumes that at the first adjustment point, it's going to drop down to index plus margin, and it's going to stay there for the remaining life of the loan. Now, the reason I would even show best case, knowing that this is completely unrealistic, is that that's what the APR is based on. It's kind of weird. When you look at the APR that's generated from your origination system on an adjustable rate mortgage, it doesn't make any predictions about the long term. It tells you what the potential is for the worst case adjustments, but it calculates the APR based on no adjustments at all, just index and margin after the first adjustment point. And oftentimes you'll find your APR is actually lower than your note rate on an ARM. So that's why. Now, if I'm going to show best and worst, I might as well show a custom. And I'll copy that worst. And I will just go in, and instead of worst or best this time, I'm just going to choose a custom scenario. So let's say at my first adjustment point, I only want it to come up a half a point. And then I'm going to add another line item. And let's say maybe the next adjustment I want to show them is at month 96, maybe a full point. I'll add one at month 120. Bring it down a half a point. You could do a negative point there, or negative half a point. And you can see it brought down my rate. Maybe add one at 180 and bring it up a couple of points just in case. And I would say that that's a very soft prediction. That's kind of banking on rates going up versus being, if I wanted to, I could make so these adjustments are a lot less. I could reduce the frequency of the adjustments, whatever you see fit to do there. I like to kind of keep it middle ground when I'm doing a custom adjustment between worst and best case. Bob's comment: it would be nice if the max rate was based on a margin so that it adjusts with the entered start rate. So yeah, I totally get you, Bob. We've been talking about this one for years, and the only problem with doing that is that backwards compatibility fails. And what that means is that everybody who has past presentations that have a max rate, um, their presentations are going to be whacked out. So if we change this to actually be life cap, and then had our calculations do life cap plus start rate to give that max rate on the adjustment schedule, it'll work for everyone going forward. But for every presentation in the past, it would be a nightmare. But we're still trying to consider ways to make that happen, Bob. So I'm with you. I think that would make it a lot easier too. All right. Well, it looks like we are at the top of the hour, so I'm going to go ahead and call it for the day. Thanks everybody for your interaction, Bob, Bob, Louisa, Josh. Thank you for your great questions. I really appreciate those, and certainly feel free to jump in anytime you want. We're doing this every Thursday, so if you have specific scenarios you'd like to see, specific strategies, just stop into the class, have a couple of questions ready, and we'll be happy to show them to you. Well, with that said, thank you very much. Have a great day, everybody, and contact our support team if you need any help. Support at mortgagecoach.com. We're always here for you. Thank you much.